So, good morning, everyone. And this is the discussion for intermediate and extreme value theorem. So, this lesson brings us the two important theorems in studying continuity, the intermediate value theorem and the extreme value theorem. And let's see how these two theorems work. Intermediate value theorem states that if a function is continuous over a closed interval from A to B, then for every value S between f of A and f of B, there is a value C such as an element from A to B such that f of C is equal to S. If we're going to look for the example, say let's have the function x squared minus 2. If we're going to plot it, this is what it looks like. And this is we know that this is a polynomial function, so therefore it is continuous because as we learned previously, yung mga functions that are polynomials in nature are continuous, no, in for all x. Say suppose we choose negative 3 and 2 interval. So ibig sabihin from negative 3 to positive 2. Say ito siya. Um, from negative 3, say ito, going to 2. Yan. And if we're going to plot negative 3 doon sa ating function, then we will get negative 3, and then that is equivalent to 9 minus 2, so that is 7. So negative 3, 7, this one. And then if we plug in 2 for every excess, so we have 2 squared is 4 minus 2 is 2. Say we have positive 2 here. Yan. And then let's choose S. Say based on the definition of the intermediate value theorem, yung f of c is equal to S. Sabi dito ay for every value S between f of A and f of B. Meaning our condition is S should be lying between A and B, or the function of A and then the function of B. So say in between negative 3 and then positive 2. So any point. Say we choose 2. So if S is equal to 2, then siya ay nandoon sa element. Element siya ni 2 to 7. Yan. So ibig sabihin, sir, paano po yung 2 to 7? Yung element na 2 to 7, so, di ba? F of negative 3 is 7. So, nandito siya. And then, yung 2, say, nandito. Ibig sabihin, if we select 2, say, in between the x's, yung y value niya, yung y na s, ay nandito sa pagitan ng dalawa. Okay? Yan. So, ibig sabihin, kasali siya. So, using the intermediate value theorem, there is a number C, such as C. This is an element of negative 3 and 2. Yung negative 3 and 2 na interval. That is f of C is equal to 2. So, thus, 2 is equal to f of C is equal to C squared minus 2, which is equal to 2. So, that's the idea of the intermediate value theorem. Okay? Do you have any question for this? Hearing none, let's move forward. What is the extreme value theorem anyway? This tells us that we can find an extreme value provided that a function is continuous, or if f of c is continuous over a closed interval, then f of x has a maximum and minimum value over that interval. Extreme, no? Kaya siya extreme. Ibig sabihin, extremely high, extremely low, the maximum or the minimum. So we call them as maximum and minimum. A function has an absolute maximum. Remember this, no? Absolute maximum at x is equal to c if the function is less than or equal to f of c at x is equal to c for every x in the domain of the function. Next, a function has a relative maximum at x is equal to c if the function is less than or equal to the f of c ano at x is equal to c for every x in some open interval around x is equal to c. So some open interval around x is equal to c. Next is the function has an absolute minimum at x is equal to c if the function is greater than or equal to f of c for every x in the domain of the function. So that's for all x. And it has a relative minimum if the function of x is greater than or equal to f of c for every x in some open interval around x equals c. So that's the idea. So kapag absolute maximum for every domain of the function, f of x is less than or equal to the f of c at x is equal to c. And when we substitute c for every x, and then if the function is less than or equal to the function of c. Okay, so let's try to look at it. Let's find the absolute maximum and the absolute minimum of the function x squared minus 4x on the interval negative 1 and 4, meaning from negative 1 to 4, x is negative 1 here and then 4 here. So from this interval, let's find the absolute maximum and minimum. Meaning, yung absolute maximum is where the point is at the maximum level, no? Yung maximum function niya. And then yung minimum, of course, the minimum value. The absolute maximum can be solved using the concept of derivative. Although we will be discussing derivative perhaps tomorrow. Since we have already familiar with the table of values and graphs, so let's try to utilize them. If we're going to plot, we will see that the maximum is from negative 1 to 4. The maximum point that can be obtained is negative 1 and 5. You see this? Yeah, negative 1 and 5. While using the same table of values, we will note that 2 and negative 4 is the absolute minimum. Yan. It should be clear in mind that there might be other maximum points along the graph in the open interval. So, if we're going to consider negative infinity to positive infinity, so merong pang posible, no, posible na other maximum points, no. But since we only consider negative 1 and 4, and since negative 1 and 4 here, no, we see that this is already the maximum, the maximum value, and then this is the minimum value from negative 1 to 4 x's. Then we can say that they are the absolute minimum and absolute minimum and absolute maximum. So collectively they are called extrema. Yan. So yung mga minima and extrema. Yan. I mean minima and minima and maxima. So generally they are called extrema. Can also be found at the end of the graph. So usually kung ano yung pinakadulo, yun siya. Okay? So that's the idea of absolute maximum and minimum. How about relative? Consider this. With the help of the table of values and graph, the relative maximum and minimum can be easily located. For example, we graph x cubed minus 3x squared on the interval negative infinity to positive infinity. As what the figure on the right shows, the relative maximum is the point whose coordinates are 0, 0, while the relative minimum is 2, negative 4. So, ang open interval natin ay from negative infinity to positive infinity. If we're going to plot the graph of this function x cubed minus 3x squared, we will see some turning points. No? The turning points here, this one is relative maximum. We say that this is a maximum, however, it's not absolute because there are some points here that are or that have greater y values. Okay, and we can say that this minimum is not absolute because if you're going to look at the graph, there are some points here that provides us some minimum point, no, some minimum value less than -4. So on that note, but we can consider them as relative minimum. Ano? So, ayan siya. Okay? Unlike absolute extrema, relative extrema, collectively relative minimum and relative maximum should always lie between the open interval. So, usually ganun siya na. Uh, Take note of this. Pag open interval, there are some possibilities. Usually kasi kapag open interval siya, dire-diretso siya. Lalo na kapag cubic, for example to, graph of a cubic function. So, ibig sabihin siya ay continuous. Kapag siya ay tumaas na, you cannot reach the maximum, the absolute maximum, or the absolute minimum. But along the way, you can consider some of the maximum, the turning points, the relative maximum, and the relative minimum. Okay? How about this one? So let's analyze this graph of sine and uh, another polynomial. So the function 3 sine x over the interval -360 or -2 pi going to pi, take a look at this. You will see some values here now. But you will notice that the graph no provides already the absolute minimum and the absolute maximum. Excuse me. Ang meron na tayo yung minimum at saka yung maximum na absolute. No? At x is equal to -3 pi over 2 and pi over 2 at -3 at x is equal to -pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2. So, maximum niya yung 3, minimum niya yung -3. In the same way, the graph, yan. Since this is uh, over a closed interval, yan. So, -4 and 3, you can see the graph. This is the relative minimum and then this is the relative so maximum. Pero in this particular graph, no, since it's in the close interval, we can say that this is already our absolute maximum and this is the absolute minimum. So, both graphs do not have relative maximum. Ano? Kasi open interval, close interval sila. Okay? So, any further question? Hearing none, so you are going to do this assessment. Ano? You're using the intermediate value theorem to determine yung interval of S on a specified interval. So ano ba yung kanyang interval, no? So and then you will also find the absolute and relative extrema. Yung absolute kung meron or relative kung meron. So given yung mga interval. Okay? So that would be all and thank you.